Welcome to RX Report. It's Friday, January 10th, 2025. I'm Manuel coming to you from the home of pharmacy at the American Pharmacists Association in snowy Washington, D.C., and thank you so much for tuning in to our premiere show. This is your weekly Friday show, giving you the top updates you need to know on all things health and pharmacy. Today's leading stories deal with Americans getting this close to accessing cheaper medications, a potential cure for diabetes, and celebrating a living legend in pharmacy. On this show, we've got it all, so don't forget to like and subscribe and get your health, your news delivered. Let's dive in. Picture this, a world where your prescriptions are cheaper, where you can get them from your local trusted pharmacists, and you don't have to worry about surprise coverage changes. That sounds pretty good, right? Well, that almost became a reality last month, but Congress left us hanging. Let me explain. For anyone outside of the pharmacy profession, maybe you're unaware of PBMs, in which case you are blessed, my sweet summer child. Maybe you've heard the acronym before and don't quite know what it means, but you know that it's bad somehow or other. So, I'm sorry, but let me lift the veil for you a little bit here. PBM stands for Pharmacy Benefit Manager. Originally, these middlemen simply processed prescription drug claims through your health plan. Sounds like a half-decent idea. Well, what was once maybe a helpful position has become a many-headed beast of a problem for patients in the U.S. today. PBMs quickly began to take on roles on deciding what drugs your health plan covers, negotiating the costs of these drugs with manufacturers, and then even deciding the pharmacies where you can have your prescriptions filled, all under the guise of controlling prescription drug prices. You see, as PBMs worked to control one end of the drug supply chain, they also began to develop business interests in the very marketplace that they were hired to control. Bit of a conflict of interest, I might hear you say. PBMs negotiate drug prices, but often only for rebates for themselves, rather than to benefit patients in need. Higher priced drugs result in higher rebates for PBMs, so oftentimes insurers are required by PBMs to only cover high-priced prescriptions, even if a cheaper generic alternative may be available. Rebates being a substantial part of PBM revenue creates this massive conflict of interest where it is in the best interest of PBM companies to overcharge American patients who are already being squeezed by an ever-increasingly difficult healthcare system to navigate. Though not the only ones guilty for insanely inflated drug prices, PBMs play a big part in keeping the prices elevated. So, understandably, many called on regulation or removal of PBMs from the system altogether. And for a minute there was light at the end of the tunnel. During the December government's shutdown worries, a stopgap bill was written to keep the government running for another few months. That end-of-year bill originally included major PBM reforms championed by APHA. These provisions would have provided a lifeline to keep local pharmacies open where they are needed the most. By banning the use of abusive PBM spread pricing, where PBMs overcharge state Medicaid programs for those with lower incomes, and then at the same time underpay pharmacies for their own profits, another provision would have forced the PBMs to pass on 100% of these rebates to health providers, making the costs even lower, and then even better, PBMs would have been forced to shine a light on their notoriously opaque drug spending processes to federal regulators, employers, and the public, which has been an issue for decades. All of this sounds great, right? Like less overcharging, more transparency, and greater respect for both patients and pharmacies. Sadly, it was not to be. Spurred on by former and future President Trump, the House GOP removed the version of the bill with PBM reform and replaced it with another spending bill focusing instead on extensions for public health programs and telehealth capabilities. And that's good, I guess. It feels like we were this close to greatness, this close to something that was so much better, only for it to be stolen away at the last second. But I don't want to end on doom and gloom with this story. So, despite pushing the GOP to reject the PBM reform bill in the December stopgap, Trump has specifically mentioned going after PBMs, saying in a press conference,
"We have a thing called the middleman. You know the middleman, right? The horrible middleman that makes more money, frankly, than the drug companies, and they don't do anything except they're a middleman. We're going to knock out the middleman. We're going to get drug costs down at levels that nobody has ever seen before."
Now, APHA has already successfully worked with future President Trump during his first term to sign a federal law banning the PBM gag clauses that previously had denied pharmacists' ability to share when it was cheaper for patients to purchase a drug without going through insurance, which is insane that needed to exist in the first place. Also, the number of federal PBM bills is growing, with a new bill right now that would require the 3 big PBMs to divest from also owning pharmacies to restore some competition in the vertically integrated PBM marketplace that created a monopoly at the expense of pharmacists and patients. Now, whether or not that will happen, we'll have to wait and see. But until then, I'd love to pass the question off to you. Did you know how big of a role PBMs played in your drug prices? Like, what do you feel about the PBM reform? Let me know in the comments down below. Now, let's switch gears to some truly groundbreaking news. What if I told you type 1 diabetes, an illness affecting millions, might finally have a cure? Type 1 diabetes affects roughly 1.7 million Americans and over 8 million worldwide. Chances are you know someone who has it, or maybe even have it yourself. I have it, and yes, it sucks. But fear not, my pancreas challenged brethren. After decades of research, we may finally have some hope. First, a very basic overview on type 1 diabetes. Bodies produce and gain energy from glucose, which is primarily sourced from food. The body then self-regulates this glucose from creating too elevated of a blood sugar with insulin, which is produced by the pancreas. However, for reasons that are still unclear, many contract type 1 diabetes, which then causes cells to attack the pancreas, severely limiting or eradicating completely a body's ability to produce insulin, requiring those affected to take external shots constantly for the rest of their lives in order to avoid damage caused by high blood sugars. Now, the good news is that insulin has been a readily available drug for decades. That being said, the bad news is that for many, the insulin is still very difficult to afford or access for insane reasons that I'll have to dive into in a whole other video. But that's not why we're talking about diabetes today. For the first time in history, doctors were able to use stem cells to give a type 1 diabetic woman insulin independence. Very basically, the stem cells were taken from the patient, reprogrammed to transform pancreas attacking cells into cells that can be utilized to create insulin via the pancreas. These cells were then reinserted into the patient, and she was then able to be completely insulin independent within 3 months. I cannot overstate how monumental this is. Diabetics have been sold on the dream of an artificial pancreas for years, and where we used to be hopeful on that, we now just kind of roll our eyes at the idea. But this is something new. Actual insulin independence with no insulin shots, pumps, or other hardware attached to the body. That's not a reality that has been considered possible. But now there is potential hope for a real game-changing shift in living with diabetes. Now, all of this being said, I want to put out a couple of big asterisks. First of all, this study has been done on only one patient, and she is still being very closely monitored. This treatment will require a lot of research and development before it even comes close to being readily available for mass consumption. Also, the patient currently takes immunosuppressant drugs in order for her body to not attack these reprogrammed cells, meaning that the current state of this cure would require diabetics to further lower their immune system's ability to fight off normal illnesses just to mitigate the danger of diabetes. Also, stem cell treatments are considered experimental by most health insurance companies and are rarely, if ever, covered. Lastly, stem cell research has historically been slowed or halted even under GOP administrations. Now, whether or not that will happen with the upcoming administration is anyone's guess. But until then, I'd love to know your thoughts on the whole story. Are you or someone you know affected by diabetes? Would you be open to a cure if it meant taking immunosuppressants? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Now, a question for you. Are you curious about the direction that the pharmacy profession is headed in and how pharmacists could collaborate for a healthier America? Well, coming next week on January 15th, the Joint Commission of Pharmacy Practitioners, better known as JCPP, will be convening to discuss how pharmacists can come together and accelerate payment for pharmacists' patient care services, which, as it happens, is one of APHA's strategic priorities. Isn't that nice? For those who may not be familiar, JCPP is a coalition of 13 national pharmacy organizations united to advance pharmacist-provided patient care and strengthen the profession's role within the healthcare system. APHA Executive VP and CEO Michael Hogue and APHA President Alex Varkey will both be attending to gather insights from speakers and attendees and highlight APHA's commitment to advancing payment for pharmacist services. To the profession and their commitment to fostering collaboration, Alex's mantra of better together highlights the importance of APHA's engagement with JCPP member organizations and reminds us that by working collectively across organizations, sectors, and communities, we can achieve far greater outcomes than we ever could individually. So, stay tuned to this show where we will discuss the latest developments from the meeting and what it means for you moving forward. Last but not least, let's celebrate a true icon in pharmacy. Our final story of the day concerns the Remington Honor Medal. The leading award in pharmacy, it is the highest honor bestowed by APHA since the award's inception in 1918. Honoring distinguished service on behalf of the field of pharmacy, this year's honoree is Stephen W. Schondelmeyer, PharmD, PhD of Minneapolis. His expertise from over 50 years of research resulted in improving prescription drug access and affordability, establishing policy to reduce drug shortages and even improve drug supply resilience. His work has encouraged drug price competition, shaping drug benefit plan management and prescription drug reimbursement, shaping health policy as we know it today. From all of us at APHA, congratulations to Dr. Schondelmeyer. And that is it for our premiere episode of RX Report. What's your take on PBM reform? How do you feel about the potential cure for diabetes? Let me know in the comments. You can do that on YouTube. Spotify lets you do it now too. Be sure to click that thumbs up and subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. Our executive producer is Rob Hodges. Our creative producer is Kate Erdmann. And until next time, I'm Mason Manuel. Tune in next Friday to get your health, your news delivered. I'll see you then. Bye, y'all.